Knowledge in crisis.
The podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Knowledge in Crisis podcast. I'm Cathy Mason. I'm an assistant professor here at CEU.
And I'm Matt Dougherty. I'm also an assistant professor in philosophy at CEU, and we're here today with Juliette Vazard, a postdoctoral researcher in philosophy. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great. So we're here today to talk about emotions and knowledge. So to get us started, Juliette, could you start by saying something about why we should be thinking about this question?
Yes. Well, I can start with why we should think about emotions. Why is this a philosophically interesting topic? Well, emotions are such a foundational aspect of our psychology. Like, we share these very basic feelings of fear and grief and rage and playfulness with many other animals. It's such an evolutionarily old part of us, which in humans, of course, takes very sophisticated forms. Like, we can think about our emotions, we can have concepts for our emotions, we can write poetry about them. But still, emotions permeate our mental life to an extent that it's still really not clearly understood or perhaps acknowledged. And that's largely because the science of emotion is so young. So psychologists first started taking emotions as a serious topic of study in the 1990s. So the new field of affective science was born then. So compared to other features of our psychology like memory or language, or scientific knowledge of emotions is very young. And that's what makes it a very exciting terrain for philosophers to get involved in building some of the foundational theoretical assumptions and try to, from those empirical studies that are now abounding more and more, try to build the best possible models of what emotions are.
You said that we share emotions with non-human animals as well, which is very plausible. Do you think that all of our emotions are the types of emotions that can be shared by animals? Do you think that ours are just more specific, more detailed? How do they relate more specifically in your kind of picture and your way of thinking about emotions?
So I think it's very plausible to think that we do share a small set of very basic affective reactions with a lot of animals, like fear. You can see many animals reacting swiftly as we do to all sorts of danger. That's what fear is. So they have this affective program that helps them and helps us get out of danger in a very efficient way without them having to, or us having to really think about what to do. I think you can see certain animals grieve. Maybe that's more controversial. Playfulness is definitely a shared feeling. But as I said, because we have language and we have parts of our brains that evolved much later in our human brain, we get this feedback loop between these very evolutionarily old part of our brain that contains these feelings and the newer layers with the language and concepts and reflection and reasoning. So we build upon those raw feelings layers of meaning, and that's what creates just a wide variety and words that we have, and maybe cultural variation that we see in the different emotions that people across the globe can express and report having.
So we feel what animals feel, but perhaps we feel more.
Perhaps we feel more. Perhaps we have also ways in which several feelings can mix together, and the way in which we make meaning of those feelings and think of them. So definitely the way you guide your attention, for example, on certain feelings, how much you think about them, how much you elaborate on them, how much you put your attention voluntarily on them, that's going to fuel them, that's going to impact how they unfold in time, that's going to change their shape. So all of these feedback loop between emotion and cognition are going to shape our feelings.
So let's move to that connection between emotions and cognitions, as you've called it, or perhaps emotions and knowledge. What do you think the connection there is? You've suggested one kind of way in which emotions might be helpful, practically helpful. We might, for instance, feel fear, and that might be helpful in getting us or animals to run away from danger. But what do you think the knowledge connection here is?
So many philosophers think that we can gain knowledge, or emotions can contribute to, in a very indispensable way, to us getting knowledge both about our world and about ourselves. So concerning knowledge of our world, well, when we feel emotions like fear or anger or sadness, these are responses to events, and these responses are thought to constitute forms of evaluations of those events. So really, through feeling sadness, I evaluate the meaning of a certain event as a loss. So this event, whatever it is, it could be the death of my cat, or it could be anything you can imagine, the variety of events that can generate sadness in us. Well, what all of these events are in common is that we apprehend them through sadness as losses. So we understand their evaluative meaning as we experience the sadness. And it's very plausible to think that creatures who could not experience that feeling, who could not appraise events through this mode of sadness, maybe could relate to the concept of loss, but they would have a very different understanding of what losing something precious means than the one we do, than the one emoting creatures do. And the same applies to all other types of emotions. So by a type of emotion, I just mean sadness. Like all instances, episodes of that sadness are part of the same type of emotion, which we call sadness. All episodes of anger are ways in which you evaluate whatever events you respond to with anger as offenses. So anger is your mode of evaluating a certain event in terms of its offensive character. And that immediately informs you that the appropriate way to react to this type of event is through, for example, defending yourself or asking for an acknowledgement or an apology, depending on the kind of creature that you are. And just saying a little bit more about how this relates to self-knowledge, well, we react affectively with anger or sadness or fear only to what matters to us, right? Those emotions are spontaneous responses that we manifest only for events that are important to us, that we care about. So we can understand what's important to us, what matters to us, by looking at our affective lives, by noticing how we respond and which kind of events do elicit in us or fail sometimes to elicit in us what we can call affective interest.
So is the idea there that we experience emotion and that makes knowledge available to us about particularly what we value that wouldn't otherwise be available, but also makes it knowledge about ourselves available that perhaps would otherwise be difficult or even impossible to access?
Right. So thank you for pushing me to specify. So we say that emotions allow us to access evaluative knowledge about the world. Emotions allow us to access this evaluative dimension of events around us, which means it allows us to know certain events as losses, or to know that certain events are shameful, or to know that they are dangerous. So it allows us to access this evaluative knowledge, knowing certain events under those shameful, dangerous, admirable, etc. aspects.
So I agree that emotions seem very good ways of telling things about ourselves and what we value. And I also agree that emotions sometimes tell us things about events outside of us or things like that. But of course, presumably also, and I think that a lot of people who, maybe value cognition over emotion or thinking over emotion or make these sorts of distinctions will think, well, one of the risks of emotion is that it also can deceive you into thinking that something is shameful when it's not. And so emotions can also mislead and may not always lead to knowledge. I assume you agree with that?
Yes, our sensory perceptions can mislead us. We can misperceive the world. Our senses, our vision is not infallible. And in the same way, or in a slightly different way, but analogically, our emotions can be misguided. They are very quick bodily reactions that carry with them a certain appraisal of situations that is complex. what is it for a specific action to be shameful? When we feel shame, we have this very quick, yet seemingly very complex appraisal. But before we can even think and reflect on what we've done and which kind of norm it violates and why we feel the way we feel, we have this very quick urge to hide and stop talking and not make any more of a mess. And that's extremely useful.
So do you think this distinction that Matt just gestured towards in his question between thinking and emotions, on the other hand, is that a distinction that you still want to draw? Or do you think it's complicated by thinking about emotions as having this connection to knowledge that you've just been drawing out? Or should we instead think of emotions as part of thinking? Or how do you think these relate?
Well, the neurology is quite complicated and I'm not going to get into this. But that's part of why a lot of philosophers say that emotions are indispensable for us to gain this evaluative knowledge on the world, knowledge of the world as sometimes dangerous, sometimes of ourselves, of our acts as shameful. They put us in the right conditions to access this knowledge, and maybe they provide an initial good assessment. But perhaps in order to gain full knowledge of whether an event or an act was really shameful, or whether a gesture or remark was really offensive, maybe we need to go and double check. And that's generally what emotions themselves prompt us to do. So emotions focus our attention. They have a huge impact on attention. They immediately focus on attention on whatever object or remark or event they have identified as evaluatively salient or relevant, so that they put us in really good cognitive conditions to actually process this event and keep thinking further. And they actually prompt us to channel our cognitive resources and our reasoning and kind of ramp up those deliberative processes so that we are really in the best conditions to determine whether this event was really, really offensive. And generally, we come to our own conclusions, which might go in the direction of the initial assessment that was provided by the emotion, or which might nuance it or contradict it.
So the thought there is perhaps that what the emotions do is channel our attention towards different things so that our thinking is then channeled by the emotion. They're not kind of separate resources to draw upon. What an emotion does is feed into and shape our thinking in ways that you think can be fruitful.
Exactly. So what a lot of people think is that it would be very difficult for us to identify what is evaluatively relevant in the world, what we should actually pay attention to, what matters right now among all the information that we are exposed to at every moment. We are just overwhelmed by this mass and noisy information, and emotions are thought to play a huge role in overcoming this problem for our cognitive systems of what to pay attention to, what is relevant, what merits an immediate reaction. And so it is thought that without the power of emotions to kind of channel our attention, it would be very difficult for us to make sense of the world in terms of what matters most to us, which is identifying dangers and threats, but also opportunities.
Could you say a bit more? Matt mentioned earlier that emotions might go astray when we think things are shameful that aren't, or miss out on things that might be shameful. What about phobias, say? They seem like an instance where our attention can be very much drawn towards the thing we're afraid of. Can you say a bit more about what's going on there and how the emotion is going wrong in that case? If I'm afraid of spiders, what's going on there? Why is it not directing my attention towards something that I realise is not a danger to me?
So phobias are classified as anxiety disorders. So these are primarily categorized at least as emotional dysfunctions. So the best way to understand these kind of conditions is as a chronic miscalibration of the response of fear, but also anxiety. All those affective responses to threats seem to be miscalibrated and somehow dysfunctional to the extent that they filter the information information coming in, mostly in terms of the threat. It's as if the subject is constantly searching for sources of threats, and especially those stimuli that if you are phobic, you're going to be kind of actively searching for the objects of your phobia, thereby kind of reinforcing your fear, so your disposition to become really afraid chronically.
Could you fill that in a bit more with regard to an example like flying or spiders, something like that? What's going on there when you've got that emotional response to flying or to spiders, something like that?
I think the example of phobias is very complicated because it's unclear why we came to associate a given object like a spider, which is, if, in many areas of the world, it's very unlikely that you're going to encounter a spider that's actually could be fatal to you. So I can't say much about the mechanism that makes us associate very high degree of danger to an innocuous object. But once we have made that association, each time that we encounter the object, we have this automatic reaction of fear that is very hard to control. So emotions are very, very fast processes. And so their evaluations, the way that they present the world to us, the way that they present the spider as dangerous, they kind of impose this evaluation very forcefully. And it takes a lot of effort to dismiss this evaluation. Why? Because emotions are embodied states. They are not only ideas or judgments that we can question. While we're questioning our emotions, meanwhile, our bodies are already trembling and already ready to flee and get as far away as possible. So emotions are primarily action readiness mechanisms, which is why they're so efficient, but also why they're so very difficult to overcome.
Going back to the question of emotions that can go wrong and how you check them. On one picture, I think one option that you suggested was that, well, when I feel an emotion, I might then think through whether it's really shameful or really fearful. But in perception, for instance, we use our eyes to check the very thing that we think we might have misperceived the first time. Do you think that emotions can do the same? So I feel shame. I then want to know whether I should be feeling shame. And so I just see whether I feel shame. So I use the same emotion again in order to recheck the initial experience that I had, rather than deferring to thinking and thinking that thinking is the thing that is really going to show me for sure whether this emotion is accurate or appropriate.
In perception, it seems that we do regularly make use of different modalities. Like if we feel like our vision might be failing us, we might try to use input from different senses, right? Different sensory modalities. For emotions, there doesn't seem to be a direct corresponding analogy, but emotions are, just initial, very fast appraisals of a situation that say, well, better safe than sorry, in case there is danger. I know we just heard a crack in the woods, but that's enough to justify my body to go into this response of action readiness such that I'm ready to run as fast as possible. My muscles are getting ready to move into action. And that's the best thing to do while I'm further processing the situation, because I have my eyes open, my ears open, and I'm constantly thinking. So as I'm feeling the emotion, I'm aware that I'm feeling the emotion. I'm registering those feelings, but I'm also starting to make guesses about why I'm feeling the emotion, what the emotion is related to, where did the noise come from. I'm turning my body. So all of this is happening at once and very quickly.
One thing that's come out in that answer and at a few earlier points was that you're thinking of emotions as having this strong kind of bodily component to them. And that makes particular sense with the examples that you've mentioned of things like fear and shame too. They both seem to have this very strong embodied aspect. I wonder what you would say then about other kinds of emotions that seem much less strongly bodily and perhaps much less strongly connected to bodily threat than something like fear. So what would you say about things like feeling nostalgic about something or wishful or intrigued by something? Those all seem like, at least on the face of them, good candidates for being emotions, and yet they don't so clearly have this kind of bodily component or this direct connection to kind of bodily threat or well-being. How are you thinking about those?
So it's interesting because emotions do not occur in a vacuum. They have to latch on to other mental states. Most of the emotions that we've mentioned so far latch on to our perceptions. So I talked about feeling fear as a response to hearing a crack. But because we have these sophisticated brains, we also have imagination and memory. We can remember the past and we can imagine the future. And of course, we can also have emotions that occur on the basis of those memories and those imaginings. We don't only have emotions that occur as a result of what we're perceiving right now. So the emotions that you're mentioning, nostalgia, wishing or hoping, these are directed towards the past and the future. And so they are responses to the films that we design in our minds, either to recollect the past or to try and anticipate the future. Nostalgia is a very interesting emotion because it's thought to be an ambivalent emotion. So ambivalent means two valences. Valence refers to the positive or negative charge that an emotion has. So most emotions are either positive or negative. Certain emotions like nostalgia seem to be kind of bittersweet, because you're thinking back at the good old days while both staying very much aware that those days are gone, long gone. So it's a sort of both rejoicing at the beautiful past we had and also feeling sad that it is now lost and we don't get to experience this life anymore. So I think there is a feeling of nostalgia, and this feeling is something like bittersweet. I also think that hoping, when we're genuinely hopeful that something will occur, I think this will also motivate us towards some actions. And actions are not necessarily immediate behavioral actions. They can also be mental, cognitive actions, like becoming hopeful and staying hopeful that I will graduate with a good grade, or that I will get my dream job, or that I will get to meet my idol, my philosophy idol. All of these are scenarios we imagine that really motivate us to further immerse ourselves into those imaginings and try and design, how could I get there? Try and make plans. And I think hope is a great fuel, a great motor for planning our lives.
That's really interesting. Could you say a bit more about the kind of knowledge that hope might be connected to? It's obviously a very interesting case because unlike fear that's typically directed to at an actual object in front of me, I'm afraid of someone or something, hope is typically directed at something that hasn't actually happened. So how could hope bring us knowledge if it's not concerning something that's actually here?
Well, if you find yourself contemplating a certain future scenario and you find yourself becoming hopeful, what does that tell you about yourself and about this scenario? Well, it tells you that this scenario is really desirable for you. You actually wish it to come true. It also, if hope is not mistaken, gives you a sense that this scenario is within reach. So we say that hope is the experience of a desirable future as encouraging or available, such that it really motivates us to put a plan into place and execute the plan and put things into motion to actually try and get closer to that state. And if you think that despair is sort of the opposite emotion that hope, despair definitely feels like something, although it is also directed at this plan that I made that I now realize will never come true. So it's literally directed at a fantasy. And as I'm despairing, I'm now realizing that what was an encouraging project is now actually disheartening. So one starts to despair usually as one gets new information about the very low likelihood that one will actually get to where we wish. And when we get that information, the affective response is very clearly one of, you should stop investing in this plan. It's not worth spending any more energy immersed in this fantasy, as good as it might feel. And so it's actually a very important response because we do tend to be in our minds and we love our imagined worlds.
So your thought is that whereas fear might often direct us to a danger right in front of us, what something like hope, for instance, might get us knowledge of is how good a possibility might be or how possible that possibility is, and that in itself is also very valuable knowledge to have.
Yes, it gives us this indispensable sense of this is a live option in the context of your life. Given what you've achieved in the past, given what you've managed to make happen, like this is an option worth taking seriously. If you desire that enough, when you feel hope, you also feel that this option is available within reach, given a certain amount of effort that you're willing to invest.
So in some respect, it's maybe completely obvious how our listeners might apply these sorts of things that you've been talking about to their lives. All of it has been very, very relevant to things that we feel and think about every day. Is there anything that they might not have thought about in terms of how they might apply these issues about emotions and about the connection between emotions and knowledge to their everyday lives?
Well, I think the way that we've been talking so far might make it sound like, well, you just have the emotions you are, given what you care about, and that's just going to be it. You have these set, fixed dispositions to just respond with a lot of anger or a lot of shame or a lot of embarrassment. But I just want to leave the listeners with the message that this is not the case. So emotions are revealing of what we care about. So if we're feeling a lot of shame in our life, or if we're feeling a lot of sadness, that might mean there is a lot of loss, or that we regularly violate norms. That might also mean that we're particularly sensitive to those aspects of our world. And we can, by noticing our emotions, when those emotions arise, they are occasions. Each emotional episode is an occasion to notice and reflect on whether the situation truly calls for shame or for embarrassment or for anger. And I truly think we can modify or refine our own emotional sensibilities by reflecting on our emotional episodes when they arise. And we can attune gain a better attunement to our evaluative world in this way. So emotions are revealing of who we are, but they also present countless opportunities to better ourselves and our way of reading and responding to our world.
Great. Thank you so much, Juliette. This has been a fascinating conversation.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
This podcast has received funding from the Austrian Science Fund as part of the Knowledge in Crisis project. We're a collaboration of more than 50 philosophers at the University of Graz, the University of Salzburg, the University of Vienna, and are led by Central European University. For more information about our research and details about upcoming public events, visit www.knowledgeincrisis.com. You can also find us on most social media platforms at Knowledge Crisis. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for our next episode.